Welcome to Dr. Lottie's Science with Soul, the podcast that transcends the boundaries between science and spirituality. Prepare to be uplifted, transformed, and awakened to create a path to healing your own life physically, emotionally, and spiritually by bridging the gap between science and soul. Today's guest is John Lockley, who is a fully initiated and ordained Sangoma Shaman from South Africa, who apprenticed under MaMngwevu, a senior Sangoma Shaman from the same tribe as Nelson Mandela. He was given a name meaning the messenger or bridge between cultures, and is now teaching online through the Shift Network as well as through his own website. John is also leading retreats in Africa. Welcome back to Dr. Lottie's Science with Soul. Today, I have a very special guest with me, and it's John Lockley. And he was actually a guest on this podcast in season 3, which was last season. And for those of you who missed that episode, it was called Wisdom and Introspection with African Sangoma Shaman John Lockley. And this man is a very interesting man, and he has so much wisdom to share with everybody on earth. And I can't wait to see what is going to come out of this episode today. But for the people who missed that episode in the last season, can you just briefly tell us, John, what is a Sangoma shaman and how did you become one?
Hi, Dr. Lotte. Nice to meet you. Thanks again for inviting me to the show. And so, a Sangoma is a traditional African healer from South Africa, and we are traditional shamans. So, traditional shamans, we get a calling through the dreams and through an illness which is called the Twasa Illness. So you don't decide to become a shaman or decide to become a Sangoma. It's the spirits, the ancestors, they call you. And so we don't have a situation in South Africa where people want to sign up to become Sangomas. That wouldn't be a good sign because it doesn't come from a place of ego, really. It comes from a place of calling. So you don't decide you want to become one. And often people don't want to become Sangomas because it's so painful with the calling illness and then all the ceremonies you have to do and the responsibilities. And also you become very sensitive as an empath, so you feel the suffering of the world, and it's a very difficult place to be sometimes. For
So the
me,
people,
yeah.
you had an illness and you had a calling. And is that typical for people who become shamans, that it's through illness that they become a shaman?
Well, they get called to become a Sangoma. So you get called to become a Sangoma in different ways. So through the dreams, psychic experiences, but it's not your own idea, like I want to become a Sangoma. That is not the way you approach the elders. Um, you normally often people approach the elders for a divination because they're not feeling well. Maybe they're getting a lot of visions, or they're experiencing a certain amount of ill health. So it could be physical ill health, or it could be emotional or psychological, or it could be like a lot of accidents and things that happen to people, which is unexplained. And this is what propels people to go and seek help with a Sangoma for a divination. And a divination is where they read your soul, they read your spirit, and that's when all the magic starts to happen. So for me, I mean, my story is quite long because I had experiences when I was a baby and then a teenager and then later on. So this is why I wrote a book called Leopard Warrior for those folks who are interested to know the full story. But the abbreviated version would be that I was experiencing a lot of illness in from about the age of 16 in terms of dreams and things like that, and strange phenomenon, and this got stronger and stronger until I was at the South African Army as a military medic. I was conscripted as a medic at the age of 18. And then I had a number of experiences, and then I was on a Zen retreat for 4 days, and I was bitten by ticks, so I got tick bite fever. And at the end of the retreat, I had a dream where a Sangoma approached me in the dream and we spoke. And I asked the Sangoma to please teach me about suffering and teach me about healing and teach me about nature. And I asked him very strongly in the dream state because I had just lost one of my patients who was only a few years older than me. And I was a medical orderly and I was working in like intensive care. And I nursed this young man for about 6 weeks, and then he died. And I used to feel his heartbeat and his pulse every single day. So it was very, very painful for me. So in the dream state, I asked the Sangoma man to show me about how to heal people who are in a very difficult state, how I can connect with their soul. And the reason is because every day my patient's mother would come to me and ask me if her son was going to live or die. And I said he was going to live, but I knew he was dying, and I was only 18. So I wanted to learn a form of healing where I could connect to the soul and spirit of someone, regardless of whether they could speak or not. I want to connect to their spirit, so that if I was ever in a situation like that again, that I could help the person's family find some kind of healing. So anyway, so I had this dream, and then in the dream, the Sangoma man said to me, in my culture, if you want to become a Sangoma, you get very, very sick. That's the way it works in my culture. And he said, so if I'm going to take you on as my apprentice, he said, you're going to get very, very sick and come close to death, because that's the way it works in my culture. And this is all a dream I'm sharing with you. So I said to him, please teach me. I'm only 18 years old. I've lost one of my patients. I also lost my beloved dog recently. I'm in South Africa. It's apartheid. It's civil war. I'm in this military hospital, and all around me, all I see is suffering and pain and death. So I said, if you don't teach me, my life is over. I said, it's already over, if you don't teach me. So he said, okay. He didn't say anything more. And I asked him 3 times. And at the end of that, like I say, I mentioned to him that I was only 18 in my life. I'd already seen so much suffering. And then the next thing, I saw an image of the next 5 years that was going to happen. And it did happen. And then the next thing I saw, a number of visions he showed me, very clear, as if I'm looking at you right now. And all those visions came to pass. And then when I woke up from the dream, I had all these boils on my legs, and I'd never had boils on my legs when I went to sleep. So it was very, very strange and very magical. And I was actually happy when I saw the boils, because I knew that the Sangoma man had accepted me to become his apprentice. So even though it was a dream state, it was very, very real. So I went to the hospital because I was working there. I started my shift, and I went into the emergency section because of my boils, for them to check it out. And they said I'd contracted tick bite fever. And none of my friends on that Zen retreat had got bitten, I think, by even one tick bite. So it was very strange. And then for the next 7 years, I got one illness after the next. But with the illnesses also came a lot of psychic experiences where I was actually connecting to the Sangoma man from my dreams. And he guided me. And then he guided me to South Korea. And I trained in South Korea with Zen masters. And then he guided me back to South Africa. And I voted for Nelson Mandela. Nelson Mandela became president. Then it was a democratic South Africa. So then I could go and find a teacher, a Sangoma teacher, because being a white man, we were not allowed to just go wandering into African areas, and vice versa. African people couldn't just wander into white areas or towns unless they had a pass. Now that's all changed, of course, but I was brought up in the 80s, and that was my reality. So when Mandela came into power, it was powerful for me spiritually, because it meant that I was now free to work with African healers without any stigma, without any chance of being arrested as well. So I went back to university, because I dropped out of university because of ill health. Then I went back, and I'm shorting the story now. I approached one of my psychology friends who was an interpreter, and he was a Xhosa man, and I asked him if he could organize for me to have an interview with a Sangoma, to have a divination. And he agreed. He went looking for someone, and he said that his son had been quite sick, and there was a wonderful and very wise Sangoma lady who had healed his son. So he asked her if we could go and have a divination with her. And he didn't mention that I was a white guy. So she said, yes, no problem. So then the next day, or a few days later, we went for a divination. And that night, my teacher-to-be had a dream where she saw me. In the dream, she said she was approached by the Great Spirit, Ucingolweendaba, who came to her and said that she needed to prepare herself to train someone to become a full Sangoma, to become a senior Sangoma like herself. And that she must be aware that this person who's going to become her apprentice is going to come from another culture. And she said this dream was Mhlope Amapupa, so it was a white dream, and it was very strong. And the voice in the dream said a few times, be prepared, this person who's going to be your apprentice is coming from a different culture. So that day, the next day when I went to her house and I saw her sweeping the yard in the front, she seemed very stern, and she looked up and she saw us, and there was this sense of gravity and gravitas around her. And then we entered her property, and she looked up and she saw me and my closer friend, and she said she knew that I was the one that the Great Spirit sent in her dream. So then we sat down and she did a divination, and she went into trance, and she started speaking in the Xhosa language really quickly. And like I say, she went into trance, and then she looked at me and she went through the illnesses that I'd gone through over the last 7 years in great detail. And this was the first time I'd ever met her. And then she stopped and she looked at me and she said, what took you so long to come to me? And I said to her, apartheid. And she said, Thixo Nkosi yam. And then she spoke a bit more in Xhosa, and the translation is, oh God, I'm so sorry, we almost lost you. You know, you almost died from the illness. And then this tear went down her face. And in that moment, when we looked at each other, there was this just pure love. There was no man and woman, black and white. There was none of that. In this moment, I looked into her eyes and I just trusted her. And there was this love. And she just wanted to help me. And it was the most incredible experience, looking into her eyes. And then the next thing she said to me, do you want to become my apprentice? And I was like so shocked. I said, what does it mean to become a Sangoma, to become a Sangoma apprentice? And she said, to become a Sangoma means the ancestors are going to work through you in different ways, and you're going to be able to heal people in all different ways, and also you're going to stop being sick. You're going to become much stronger, and also you're going to become a great trance dancer. So you can imagine, there I was, 26, 27 years old. I'd experienced a lot of heartache and a lot of illness, and I felt the magic of this moment, looking at this traditional African woman, a Xhosa woman, and feeling her love, and also smelling the herbs in the room and noticing all the African or the skins of animals. And I felt that I was in this earth shrine. And I also felt, as I looked into her eyes, that she knew how to heal the human soul, and she knew how to heal my soul. And there was just a sense of trust. And I just said to her, okay, yes, I accept. And then she said, wonderful. Okay, well, tomorrow I want you to come, and I'm going to give you your first beads, which is a sign that you are going to be my apprentice. So she gave me my first white beads, the sign of being a Ligqira, a Sangoma. And so that's how the story progressed. And I'm still in touch with my teacher and her husband, and we're very, very close. I'm like one of her children, I'm her adopted son. And because of that, I've learned the language. And not just the language of isiXhosa, but also the language of dealing with ancestors and spirits, which is a language that is only passed on to apprentices. And so it was a huge honor. Also difficult and uncomfortable because of things I've seen and experienced, but it's motivated me in my life to show the love of African spirituality and the love of African diviners and sangomas, because as I was growing up in the 80s and the 90s, South African spirituality was demonized, and people were terribly judged as African diviners. Right up to the present day. I mean, nowadays it's much better, but the respect of shamanism, Sangoma has been seen as shamans and been given that kind of respect that you see in Europe and America. It's not quite there yet in Africa and in South Africa. So a lot of traditional healers, a lot of traditional Sangomas struggle to make a living in South Africa today. And there's a lot of misperceptions and miscommunications and ideas around who they are and what they do. So this is part of my impetus or my inspiration and motivation to help spread awareness about who Sangomas are and what is their work, so that they can stand as traditional healers and shamans on the world stage with dignity and with love.
Such an incredible story. And how many years did you spend in that culture and learning about how to be a Sangoma? Was it like 1 year, 2 years, 10 years?
I apprenticed for 10 years, so it was an
Mhm.
intensive 10-year period. And now I still spend time with my elders doing ceremonies. So it's been 25 years. So now wherever I am in the world, I always go back home and spend some time with my elders, and we do ceremony together. It's not as arduous and as intense as it was when I was in training, but I
Mhm.
still check in with them and stand with them once a year if I can, But it is, I do make an effort to do that.
Yeah, and now, if I understand you correctly, your job is to bring these teachings to the rest of the world.
Yes. So now I teach people how to connect with their own ancestors, with their own spirits. And in doing that, it also means to connect to the earth and with the animal world. So I run these retreats in the Kalahari Desert in Botswana and also in South Africa, where I teach people indigenous African technology. So that means inner tracking and outer tracking. So inner tracking is connecting with ancestors, connecting with dreams, connecting with your own uMoya. Your own uMoya means the wind of life. It means your soul, that part of you that doesn't die. So it's a big thing. So how do we do that in today's modern era? So that's part of the inner tracking. And then the outer tracking is teaching people how to learn about animal communication, interspecies communication, how to follow the tracks in the sand and to know this is an eland, this is a lion, this is a leopard, this is a warthog. What do they look like? How do you follow them? So it's an education in indigenous African medicine, indigenous African technology, I'll say. So I run these retreats in South Africa, in the Kalahari in Botswana every year, and they last about 7 days and 7 to 10 days. And we are often joined by San Bushmen who come and share their skills in terms of tracking
Mhm.
and plant medicine. And then I create a shrine, an earth shrine in the bushveld, and that's where we go every day in silence, and we sit and I teach people the way I was taught by my elders. So it's a very special retreat. It requires commitment, concentration, and the will to want to connect to your own ancestors and your own silence, your own soul. And as we do that, then we become better human beings because we become more empathic and more compassionate, and we bring that energy into our communities, and then that is the hope for the future. So each person coming on the retreat is the hope for the future. It's not it's not just reliant on me as a teacher or on the San Bushman people. So one of the ancient philosophies of Southern Africa is the philosophy called Ubuntu. Now, Ubuntu means humanity, but it speaks about a circle, and it speaks about human beings existing in the circle, a bit like being in a beehive, where we are all connected and interconnected with one another and also with nature. So the first job of the human being in terms of Ubuntu is for them to make a decision to connect to their own uMoya. uMoya means the wind. So to make a decision to connect to your own soul, to that part of you that doesn't die. And once you have that decision, I want to connect to that part of me that doesn't die. I want to connect to my own joie de vie. Why am I alive? Once people make that decision, then the next decision, the next focus is to make an offering to your ancestors, those people who created you. And as you do that, then you start to connect to the circle of man, the circle of humanity. And then as you do that, you also start to connect to your own spirits. And then the circle starts to get more intricate. And then we face outwards and we face nature. And then we listen to the sounds of the bush and the sounds of the birds and see how is nature and the wilderness calling us to sit with them, to help them, to watch them, to observe. How is nature then calling us? But we can't listen properly to the animals and to the birds if we can't listen to ourselves. So the first listening is, can you hear your own heartbeat? Can you hear the wind inside of you? If all you can hear is pain and worry and wanting and desire, then okay, that's what you're hearing right now, but you need to concentrate and you need to go deeper. And then this is the journey. This is the journey. And sometimes it's uncomfortable, but that's part of life. We have to embrace discomfort in order to connect with magic. And I remember something that was quite painful for me. I was in the Kalahari, and then I was in the Okavango Desert, and not desert, sorry, Okavango Delta. It's not a desert. It's behind me here. It's very fertile and very beautiful. And I was going with a friend to scatter my father's ashes. So it was very, very painful. And we were going into the Okavango Delta, searching for a beautiful place to do it. And we saw the most incredible wildlife. We saw flocks of animals and herds of buffalo and elephants. And as we were going, I also saw a pride of lions, of about 20 lions. It was the most incredible sighting. And these lions were just stalking. They were stalking an animal. They were stalking a herd of impala. And as we got closer to the lions, we got to see them we were very close, literally like maybe 5 or 10 meters away from the lions. We were in a Jeep and we were driving along. And I remember looking into the face of one of the lions, and he was not having a good day. He had scars, he was like panting, he was thin. And I turned to my friend who was one of the trackers, and he was with me in the Jeep, and I said, "What's happening to these lions? I thought there's so much food around, but they look like they're suffering." He said there is a lot of food, but they're struggling at the moment to actually catch some of the animals because the animals are moving so quickly. And they desperately need some food. They desperately need to make a kill, so that the whole pride can eat. And I was so struck to see these lions being so powerful and so strong, but also so vulnerable and very clearly in a state of discomfort. As I looked into their eyes and I saw the scars on their faces, and I could see that they were hungry. And I felt, okay, this is the condition on earth. We have to balance our discomfort and our comfort levels. We have to balance that, and we also have to sometimes accept, in order for us to experience magic, we have to sometimes also go through hardship and go through pain and discomfort. And the modern person sometimes doesn't want to do that. We want to circumnavigate that. But traditional people, elders, always teach us the importance of feeling our discomfort, doing a prayer to the great ones and moving through that. But to ask for instant gratification is not the way forward. And it's not going to help the environment, and it's not going to help us connect to our soul, and to also help us refine and transform our soul so we can become better human beings. So this is a big teaching, and one of the teachings that I want to share today, and a teaching that I've had to go through, and I continually go through it. And that is that teaching of moving through your own discomfort and not expecting suddenly to feel wonderful, and not expecting instant gratification or instant enlightenment or instant spiritual wisdom. And when folks join me going to the Kalahari, I also say to them, the weather teaches us, because no matter how wonderful the land is and the animals, sometimes it's hot. And that heat can be oppressive and really uncomfortable. And I always invite people to just breathe into the heat and accept it, and see that as like a barrier of discomfort that you have to move through, so that the beauty of the wilderness opens up. Just suddenly expect, I want to have air-conditioned room, and I want it to be completely perfect for me. I say, don't expect that, please, because that's not the reality we're going to be walking into. Breathe into it, let go, get a face cloth or something that can cool you down, and then also notice, how do the animals deal with the weather. So outside weather, where you're feeling uncomfortable, is sometimes a good thermometer for inner weather, where we feel uncomfortable, like maybe we feel depressed or sad or low self-esteem, or whatever the inner weather conditions are. We have to navigate that with the same level of discernment and skill that we manage the weather outside.
And so these retreats, they sound just wonderful and like a miracle. I mean, it sounds like such an adventure and so many teachings, really a life-changing trip for the people that join you on these retreats. Do you have any retreats coming up this year?
Yes, I do. I have retreats, the Dreams and Tracking the Kalahari, which we're doing currently. And then I'm also having the Leopard Warrior Trails, which are going to be happening in May in South Africa. So there's still spaces available, and if people want to join me, they need to apply via my website, johnlockley.com, and we are still taking bookings, and that'll be happening at the end of May. So it's basically 8 days where we take people into the bushveld in South Africa, and 3 days of it is going to involve walking and sleeping around a fire. So it's a bit different from Dreams and Tracking, in the sense that there's 3 days of backpacking where you carry your gear on your back and then you sleep around a fire. But it's also extremely beautiful, because you get to hear the sound of the lion at night, or the sound of the buffalo or the elephant, and you feel that vibration through the air and through the land and through the soil beneath you. And nothing can replace that. No video or movie or anything like that can replace the smell and the sound of hearing a lion roaring in the distance. And then also to be guided by highly trained trackers who teach as they're walking. They don't just teach with words, they teach with their body language. So I'm very lucky with the team of people I'm working with. They are highly trained, incredibly sensitive bush trackers and safari rangers. And one of the people I'm working with in South Africa is a man called Massimo Rubuzi. And he's actually one of the people that helps to train people to become safari guides and rangers in South Africa. So it's an incredible opportunity for people to learn and to pilgrimage and to develop their connection with animals. So animal communication, interspecies communication, but also where are you with all of this? How are you connecting to your dreams and to your ancestors? This seems like a lot for folks, what I'm saying, but it isn't. It happens in a very seamless, gentle way. Part of my work is teaching people to let go of all the knowledge that you have, let go of everything you think you know, and that whole Zen training of less is more, and learning to empty yourself so you become an empty vessel rather than a vessel that is overflowing with information. The job is to learn how to empty yourself. So listening to the sound of the birds, not looking at your phone, listening to the sounds of the animals, and connecting with your sense of smell. So those are the two areas we'll be working with a lot when we're going for the walking through the bushveld in South Africa, would be connecting to the sense of smell and hearing. So we're not going to be talking much in those 3 days. We'll be walking. There'll be a bit of talking, but it'll be mostly listening and smelling.
And I'm assuming that that space is limited on these trips.
Yes, yes. But mostly when people really want to do it, we find space for them. So I always find if someone really wants to do that, there is space available. And right now there is space available. So yeah, so people
Yeah,
are
but
welcome to
it
join us.
fills up quickly, I'm sure, once people, because you don't take that many people, right? Is it 20 people or how
No,
many?
we take seven people.
7 people. Yeah, so that's
Seven
going to fill
people.
up very quickly. Right.
Yes. Well,
So,
depends.
you're right.
Yes.
And so what do you think about the situation in the world today with the war and greed and everything that we see? How can we change that? Is there anything that people can do to, make a difference in the world, make it a better place?
It's very sad. It's very sad what's happening. I remember learning about the Second World War, in the 80s, and at school, and it was a big thing. We really went into it in depth. And now when I see what's happening in Ukraine and also in Gaza, and with such high um, such sophisticated weaponry where people can be blown up in such a short space of time, and then massive destruction of property and animals. It's so sad. It's like, haven't we learned as a human race about the pain of warfare, and haven't we learned this lesson? So it sounds like we have to relearn it and relearn it and relearn it. So I remember a story of Nelson Mandela I want to share with everyone. So Nelson Mandela, for those who don't know, was a um, very powerful politician and human rights activist in South Africa, and he became the first democratic president in 1994. And he was in prison for 27 years because of his beliefs. And so incredible man, incredible man. So there's two wonderful stories I have about Nelson Mandela. The first is the one I want to share because it's very relevant, where he was interviewed by the head of the Palestinian Youth League and the head of the Israeli Youth League. And I'm sure people can do a Google search on this. I think it might be a YouTube video with him. And I remember seeing the interview and being blown away. And in the interview, they both asked him, they said to him, how did you, Mr. Mandela, they said, how did you bring peace to South Africa? How were you able to heal that split between the apartheid government and the ANC? How were you able to work together despite all these years of oppression and pain and bloodshed? And he said, well, it wasn't easy. When I had my meetings every day with the head of the NP, the National Party, who was president of the country at the time, was F.W. de Klerk. So every day we'd have these meetings and we would shake hands, and he'd ask me how I was, and I'd ask him how he was, and then we'd have a cup of coffee, and then we'd go into our negotiations. And during those negotiations, we would fight and we would argue and we'd fight and argue. And then at the end of the day, we would shake hands and we would say goodbye, and then we'd go home. And then the next day we'd start again. And then they were so intrigued by this, both these young people, the Israeli person and the Palestinian. And they said again, how did you, carry on like this? And he said, well, both me and F.W. de Klerk knew that it was a lot was riding on us getting along and treating each other with respect. And we both knew that if we didn't treat one another with respect and come up to some amicable agreement, we knew that everything would be lost in South Africa. And we couldn't afford that to happen. So we treated one another with respect, and we didn't agree with one another. We often disagreed, but we held that respect for one another. So it's the essence of conflict. If you looked at martial arts, the greatest martial arts in the world, the main tenet of it is resting on respect. So when you start in a dojo, say with karate, and you're going to have a competition, the two people who are about to go into competition, they would bow to each other, and then they would spar and they would fight. And then at the end, they would bow to each other. And that is the essence of conflict. The same with boxing and really, really good, a good sporting achievement or a good sporting competition, even boxing, which can be very brutal sometimes. The people would bump their gloves and then they would start. And then at the end, they would bump their gloves again. And there was just a mark of respect for their opponent. So this is what is lacking in both these wars that we are seeing. And that lack of respect obviously happened because something happened. There was a trauma that happened. And but at the same time, there's been a great loss of life. And a lot has happened on both sides, whether it's the Palestinians and Israelis, or again with the Russians and the Ukrainians. The people still need to come together with that mark of respect for each other and realize that there's a lot resting on this, much bigger than themselves. So this is what I'd like to see happen. I'd like to see mutual respect for people come in, where people also accept their differences and also that sense of not judging one another. I'd really love to see that. And the way we can come into these places as human beings, people who aren't politicians, who maybe feel they don't have a lot of power, we still have a responsibility when we see war like this in the world to look at our own shadows and look at it, how are we not respecting our opponent? And sometimes your opponent might be someone in your family that you really love and you get very angry with them. And how can you just respect one another and just be sweet and just see the war happening around the world as a call for all of us as human beings to look at conflict in our life and how can we change that conflict or look at it in a different way, like maybe like martial arts, where you're not agreeing with someone, but you're sparring with them. So remembering that sense of bowing out of respect, respecting the opponent, and then also respecting that opponent inside of you, respecting that shadow inside of you, that part of you that maybe you don't like. Mm-hmm. And that brings me back to a story when I was in South Korea, and we were about to receive a Dharma talk by the Grand Master. The Grand Master was a man called Xhosa and Swazi, and he was seen as one of the greatest Zen masters in recent time. And he's also seen as the Shaman Zen Master of South Korea. And this was in the 90s. And I remember him giving us a Dharma talk. And the snow was falling in South Korea. And it was really cold outside. And he started off by saying, does anyone have any questions? And everyone kept quiet. And then someone said, yes, they do have a question. And he said, mm-hmm. And what is the question? And I think it was someone from California. And they said, sir, what do we do when the devil comes knocking? And he was, the devil? And they've said, yes, sir. What do we do when the devil comes knocking? And it was like, wow, it was like a very strong question. And then Sun Sa, as we used to call him, he said, the devil.
And he starts laughing. Oh, ha, ha, the devil. And he says, when the devil comes knocking, you offer him a cup of tea. Of course, you offer him a cup of tea. So what does he mean by that, offering the devil a cup of tea? He doesn't mean agreeing with the devil, but he also doesn't mean that you try and obliterate and attack the devil. He means sit down, and he means bow out of respect and just have a sense of equanimity, which means listen. Be patient, don't judge. Wait, watch, listen. Wait, watch, listen. Offer the devil a cup of tea.
And how can we get you into the White House and teach the politicians, right? There's just so much greed in the world. Um, how can we all make it a better world? There's so many politicians and people out there that are not ready to listen. They're not ready to bow and listen to the other party, the other country, or whatever conflict it is that's out there. It's so difficult to teach these people. Or how do you get to these people that are in charge of running nations around the world? How do we make them listen to each other?
We have to start listening to ourselves first. We are in charge, you know. So often what happens in the human race, we blame. We blame our politicians, we blame our government, we blame the people in power, we blame our CEOs, we blame. What broke the back of apartheid wasn't just Nelson Mandela. What broke the back of apartheid was women and children who were dancing and singing in front of tanks. Those are the ones that broke apartheid. And I remember a moment in the 80s when I came back from school, and I remember watching the 6 o'clock news and seeing all these soldiers standing in front of a whole crowd of women and children. And the women and children were not budging, and they were not afraid of the guns. They were not afraid of the tanks. And they chanted in front of the soldiers. And I ended up learning those chants as I became a Sangoma. And I remember that was my first Sangoma teaching, watching these men, these women and children dancing in front of tanks with no fear. They were taking the power into their hands. And later on, there was a whole documentary on it called Amandla, which means power, but it means spiritual power. And I remember this moment happened as I was having my cup of tea and my sandwich, and I was 14 years old. I remember this moment where I looked and I saw all these women and children, like I say, dancing in front of the tanks. And then there was the silence. And then there was this young boy, he was about my age, and he put his hand in the air and he just went like this, Amandla. And his voice had broken. It was very strong. And then the whole crowd of people said, go here too. And then again he went, Amandla. And everyone went, go here too. That was the response. And it was like a gunshot as everyone went, go here too. And then the third time he went, Amandla. And then the whole crowd went, go here too. And Amandla means power and strength, and not just power and strength in terms of physical force, but it also means spiritual power and strength. And Gawetu means to us. And as the whole crowd went Gawetu, it was like a shot. It was like a bullet going through the whole space. And you could look at the soldiers and the police, many of whom were young conscripted soldiers. They looked afraid, and I had pity for them. But when I looked into the eyes of that 14 or 15-year-old who put his hand up, I felt ashamed to have white skin. And I also felt very proud to be South African. And nowadays you see, look what's happening in the news. South Africa is standing up for what's happening in Gaza, where a lot of Western countries aren't. And it's part of that Amandla spirit of standing up for injustice and doing what's right. So each human being has that responsibility to connect to their own Amandla, their own spiritual strength. And the way that you do that is you make a decision to connect to your own soul, to your own uMoya. So when I saw this young 14, 15-year-old guy, like I said, I felt ashamed to have white skin and I felt proud to be South African. Then the third thing I felt, I want to learn. I want to learn the spiritual culture, an African spiritual culture that makes women and children fearless in the face of extreme violence. And this is what I learned a few years later when I became a military medic. And my first job was helping Special Forces soldiers, many of whom were Black soldiers. And they came from the front lines of Angola. And they were also part of a lot of skirmishes we had, like in Mozambique and South Africa and all over. And nursing them and looking after them, I learned how they connected to that Amandla Spirit. They started teaching me. And so this is the teachings that precipitated me to receiving this calling to become an African shaman, a Sangoma. So it's very delicate and it's very strong. And it starts with the heart and soul of each human being. You know, each human being is responsible for the governments that we have. And it means each person needs to stand up, respect your opponent, do what is right for you and your community, and things will change. You have to believe that.
That's good advice. That's what I say to people too. We can only change the world by healing each person. Each person has to step up to that plate to create healing for themselves. But it's not until we tune into our own soul, like you're talking about, that we can really create the healing, because we're all connected to everything else through the earth itself, to people, to animals. But each person, when we heal, brings healing to other people, because now
That's right.
you're right, because you change with that healing. So you then resonate and train differently with other people because you carry that healing. But I know also you do these chanting and you have these amazing rattles that you showed me before we started this podcast. Would you be willing to share, end this podcast with some chanting and rattling?
Yes, I'd love to. I'd love to. So, thank you very much. So, the song I want to sing is just it's just a song of it's a chant, an Ngoma, and an Ngoma is a Sangoma chant, and it's got a particular rhythm to it, and the focus is to help people connect with their ancestors, with their spirits around them, and to help people connect to their own uMoya, that wind that goes through you, that connects you to that timeless space of who you are, of why you're here, that spirit, that soul inside of you. So that's the point of the Ngoma of the chant. And it doesn't matter if you don't understand the words. You want to feel the rhythm of it, the song of it. Okay, so here we go. So to start off with, I just invite each person to feel their own heartbeat. So you can put your fingers on your pulse points, and like you're taking your own pulse, and just drop into your own heartbeat. Close your eyes, and I invite you to your inner world, to the world of your own heartbeat, to that space inside of you. So don't worry about the outside world and what's happening in terms of politics and everything else. Turn your phone off. Connect with your heartbeat. And when you start to feel your heartbeat, I want you to have a sense of respecting your own heartbeat. See it as a being inside of you that is worthy of respect and of love. So as you feel that pulse, I want you to listen to it. Have a sense of listening and feeling your own pulse. And then the next thing I want you to do, or I invite you to do rather, is have a sense of your own pulse moving in front of you as if you are following an animal in the forest or in the bushveld.
It's that sense of watching and that sense of listening. It starts to open your senses. I want you to also accept your own heartbeat. Accept the way it's beating. Don't try and change it. Don't judge it. Rather have a sense of, oh, there's my friend. And she's beating so beautifully. Because your heartbeat is connected to the Great Mother. This life you have is a gift. And who's in control of that heartbeat is not you. You are not in control of your heartbeat. The Great Mother is in control of your heartbeat in the same way she is in control of the lightning and the thunder. So as you listen to the heartbeat inside of you, you start to listen to the Great Mother and the spirit of nature. And your connection to nature is that pulse inside of you, is that heartbeat. So have a sense of it moving in front of you like an animal moving through the bushveld or moving through the forest. Let me just take a moment of stillness before I start chanting. And I'm going to invoke the Amandla, the ancestors, the great ones, the wisdom keepers of the human race. Oh, Amandla, oh, Amandla, oh, Amandla, oh, Amandla, oh, Amandla, oh, Amazali Mammo, Mammo, oh, Amazali Mammo, Mammo, oh, Amanyange, Myange, oh, Amanyange, Myange, oh. Bolen le lam nyange myange, bolen le lam nyange. Oh ho, am nyange myange, oh ho, am nyange myange. Tama green am nyange myange. Tama green am nyange myange, oh ho. Woolen le la manyange myange, woolen le la manyange myange, hoo 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 hoo. Woolen le la bazali bammo bammo, woolen le la bazali bammo bammo, woolen le la bazali bammo bammo. Woolen le la bazali bammo bammo, hoo 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 hoo. Mama gwinya manyange nyange, mama gwinya manyange nyange, mama gwinya manyange nyange, hoo hoo hoo. Woolen le la bazali bammo bammo, woolen le la bazali bammo bammo, woolen le la bazali bammo bammo. So breathing into your heartbeat, welcoming in the pulse of the Great Mother that's keeping you alive right now. Amago. So thank you for listening, everyone, and thank you, Dr. Lot.
That was just beautiful. And so thank you so much for sharing that with all the listeners. And before we end, how can people learn more about you and how can people work with you?
The easiest way is just to go onto my website, which is johnlockley.com. And I offer private sessions and mentoring, and I do monthly webinars and ceremonies, and then I do my retreats in South Africa. So there's different offerings, different sharings which are offered to people based on what people, in terms of people's time and energy. So just come onto my website, have a look around, and if you want to meet me, then you can do that as well, through my webinars or through private sessions. So thank you.
So that's just wonderful. And we will put your link in the podcast notes as well. So go to his website and learn more about John Lockley. He is just an amazing man that's bringing so much healing and gratitude to the earth and to the people and everybody on earth. So do go and check him out and check out his retreats as well. That they sound just amazing, those retreats. So it's been a pleasure to have you back as a guest on the show today. And thank you so much for sharing your knowledge with all the listeners.
Thank you very much. Thank you so much.
As we conclude this episode, I want to express my heartfelt gratitude for your presence within our community. If you haven't yet, make sure to subscribe, leave a review, and share this podcast with friends and family. Subscribe to my newsletter in the show notes and receive new podcast episodes delivered right to your inbox. If you resonate with the interconnectedness of mind, body, and soul and are motivated to embark on a journey of personal healing, I invite you to connect with me at drlottie.com. Together, we can pave a path towards transformative healing in your own life.